guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be reacting to a video called History of Britain in 20 minutes. So this looks like a very short amount of time to actually sum up the history of a country, but I'm excited. Let's check it out and comment, like and subscribe.
The United Kingdom is a nation located in the British Isles, made up of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Thousands of years ago, the Isles were inhabited by long-forgotten pre-Celtic people, known as the Beaker culture, named for their distinctive pottery beakers.
Oh, okay.
Little is known of them, but it has been suggested that these people laid the foundations for the mysterious Stonehenge, a series of heavy standing stones which were transported from 150 miles away and arranged to form a calendar, marking the days of the summer and winter solstice. Over time, waves of Celtic-speaking people arrived from the European continent, who soon came to form the Brittonic, Gaelic and Pictish people. These people were not a unified people, but were rather many tribes who shared a similar pagan religion, language and culture. The Romans invaded, conquering what's now England and Wales, but failed to
Is there a place that the Romans didn't invade it in Europe?
Conquer the Pictish tribes to the north. The Romans launched several campaigns into this land they called Caledonia. However, their fortifications were soon overrun and abandoned, and they retreated to Hadrian's Wall. Their conquered lands were incorporated into the Roman Empire, becoming the province of Britannia. They brought Roman customs and laws, improved infrastructure and connected many towns and cities with Roman roads.
Where you see it like this is like, it's crazy, like the Roman influence and how kind of like human life as we know, it's kind of like thanks to them, right?
When the Romans left, there was a great migration of Germanic tribes. These were the Jutes, Angles and Saxons, with their language Old English. Their settlement pushed many Britons to areas in Wales, Brittany and a kingdom known as Dumnonia, while Scotland eventually evolved into 4 kingdoms. The smallest of these were the Scots, who were originally from Ireland, the Britons of Strathclyde, the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Bernicia and the Picts of Alba.
That's crazy that the Scots were like the smallest out of all of them.
Reasons, the Jutes disappeared from history, but the Angles and Saxons eventually formed 7 kingdoms. Wessex, Sussex, Kent, Essex, East Anglia, Mercia and Bernicia became Northumbria.
It's crazy that the name still exists.
After the collapse of Dumnonia, the remaining territory of Cornwall fought against the powerful kingdom of Wessex. Cornwall eventually fell under the control of Wessex, but it managed to keep its own culture. Wales at this point was also made up of several separate kingdoms, the largest being Gwynedd in the north, Powys in the east and Dyfed to the south. The British Isles soon saw numerous Norse raiders from Scandinavia. These were the Vikings, and they began settlement on many of the Scottish Isles, the Isle of Man, and they even founded the city of Dublin in Ireland.
Oh, that's why there's like so much influence, some Scandinavian influence over there.
The Scots and the Picts then decided to unite under Kenneth MacAlpine to form the Kingdom of Alba. The Kingdom of Alba grew strong over the years, and eventually Strathclyde was brought into the fold. Meanwhile, Danish Vikings arrived in the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms for conquest. After fighting,
must have been crazy living those days, like everyone was conquering each other and you were constantly getting invaded.
The King of Wessex, Alfred the Great, the Danelaw was formed, a land where the laws of the Danes held influence over the Anglo-Saxons, controlling the region and its affairs. The Anglo-Saxons eventually defeated the last Viking king of York, Eric Bloodaxe, and Athelstan became the first king of the English. Although, the newly formed Kingdom of Denmark would conquer England and even found a short-lived Danish dynasty under Canute. The Norsemen had a dramatic impact on the Isles, so it's no wonder some words in the English language have Norse origin. After defeating
but it didn't know that it was to that extent.
Formidable sea raiders from Ireland, the Western Isles, Scandinavia and Anglo-Saxon forces from Mercia, Griffith ap Llywelyn subdued his rivals in southwest Wales. Llywelyn became the only Welsh king ever to rule over the entire territory of Wales. He was defeated by the English Earl Harold Godwinson and killed by his own men, leading to the Welsh kingdoms splitting apart once more.
Treason.
At the death of Edward the Confessor, there was a succession dispute between 4 claimants. Harold Godwinson was elected as king. and managed to defend England from an invasion by the Norwegian king Harald Hardrada. However, Harold had to march his army south to defend against Duke William of Normandy, who had crossed the English Channel. According to tradition,
you're constantly like fighting new enemies, it's awful.
At the Battle of Hastings, Harold was killed by an arrow to the eye, and the Norman invaders were victorious.
That's awful.
The new King William defeated a number of rebellions, built a new design of castles called moat and baileys, and introduced a number of reforms, like trial by combat and the Domesday Book.
Oh my god.
The Norman dynasty invaded into South Wales and parts of Ireland, creating the Lordship of Ireland. At court, nobles spoke and conducted sessions in the Anglo-Norman language, which endured for centuries and left an incredible mark in development of modern English.
Okay.
After a brief civil war, Henry II would marry Eleanor of Aquitaine, establishing the Angevin Empire, beginning a long rivalry against France. Richard the Lionheart defended much of this territory and also became a central Christian commander during the Third Crusade, achieving considerable victories against his Muslim counterpart, Saladin. Under King John, heavy taxes were imposed on his barons in order to pay for his expensive foreign wars.
Kind of funny, humans still have the problem of taxes, been a thing since forever.
The barons rebelled and forced John to sign the Magna Carta, a charter that established the principle that everyone was subject to the law, even the king, guaranteeing the rights of individuals, the right to justice, and the right to a fair trial.
It's kind of crazy that it took them so long to do this.
Most of North Wales remained independently ruled by several Welsh princes until 1216, when Llewellyn the Great became the ruler of the Principality of Wales. This would be the case until Edward
Gaelic name?
I, who conquered Wales in 1284, effectively becoming part of England. At the death of King Alexander III, Scotland was left with 14 rivals for succession. To prevent civil war, the Scottish magnates asked Edward I of England to elect a claimant. John Balliol was elected king, but was constantly undermined by Edward, who opposed Scottish independence. Edward decided to
again, better things since forever.
Launch several campaigns to conquer Scotland and depose King John, to which he acquired the nickname Hammer of the Scots. Under a brave Scottish knight William Wallace, the Scots mounted resistance against the English, defeating them at the Battle
I did not know that William Wallace was that old. I thought it was like 1400.
of Stirling Bridge. Edward marched north in person and defeated Wallace in battle, but Wallace managed to escape. He was later captured and executed, but his efforts allowed Robert the Bruce to rise up and defeat the English, securing Scottish independence. When the King of France died without an heir, Edward III was technically eligible to the crown, through his mother. The French court denied his claim and instead installed Philip of Valois. Edward paid homage to Philip as he owned the lands of Gascony and was essentially a vassal to the King of France. Due to disagreements, Edward reasserted his claim to the throne and invaded France, beginning the 100 Years' War.
Of course.
The English achieved notable victories at the Battle of Crécy, Poitiers and Agincourt thanks to the technical superiority of the longbow, but was unable to conquer the French with the appearance of Joan of Arc, who lifted the French spirit and turned the tide of the war. Upon the death of Edward III, an entire generation was skipped in the line of succession, which prompted bitter rivalry between several claimants.
Of course.
Most notably were the houses of York and Lancaster. Tensions were high until a bloody age of warfare erupted between these two factions in the Wars of the Roses. It's so in-depth and complicated this period will likely become a video of its own.
Yes.
The wars ended with the arrival of the Tudor dynasty. Henry VIII wanting a divorce split with the church, creating his own Church of England. This ultimately led to a series of religious differences between future English monarchs. In between his 6 wives and naval adventures, Henry gave Wales representation in Parliament and created the Kingdom of Ireland, but realistically...
This is interesting because I think you only know him because of like the bunch of wives, so it's like, oh, I didn't know this.
He only controlled an area known as the Pale. In addition, Henry's paranoia and suspicion amounted to tens of thousands of executions, including his friends and wives.
Yeah.
During the 16th century, the largest and most powerful empire was Spain, under King Philip II. England, under Elizabeth I, were helping Dutch rebels reject Spanish rule, and many English privateers were also intercepting Spanish silver on its journey back from the New World. This angered the Spanish king, and the final straw came when Elizabeth had Mary, Queen of Scots, executed. because she did not want Scotland falling under Catholicism. The Spanish Armada, consisting of 130 ships, was deployed to invade England. At the Battle of Gravelines in England,
That seems like a few amount of ships if you want to invade a country and a territory.
British victory forced the Spanish fleet to sail around the British Isles before storms in the north of Scotland destroyed the remaining ships. In retaliation, the English, led by Sir Francis Drake, amassed their own armada to invade Spain, but this too became a failed endeavour. Born in this period, William Shakespeare became a renowned poet, playwright and actor who contributed significantly to English literature.
This is like, meanwhile, they're fighting, I'm creating poetry, and I'm creating like beautiful pieces of creative like work.
When Queen Elizabeth of England died without an heir, her closest male relative was James VI of Scotland. James was elected as King of England and Scotland in a personal union, although the countries remained separate political entities. As the first monarch to rule the entire island of Great Britain, several assassination attempts were made by Catholic conspirators.
As one does.
Such assassination attempt was the gunpowder plot by Guy Fawkes, who tried to blow up Parliament. After a failed colony known as Roanoke, England established a successful colony known as Jamestown, which would eventually evolve into the 13 colonies. At first, expeditions to the New World were mainly driven by religious motives, which were predominantly to convert the natives to their faith. But colonies became more
That's interesting, because I thought it was just about territory and not about religion.
profitable as demand for New World crops like tobacco and sugar increased.
Yeah, then it was like an economical thing, but it started as religious. I had no idea.
Ships also made a monopoly on the transportation of captive African slaves that crossed the Atlantic to the
Yeah,
Americas.
that's awful.
Millions of Africans were shipped in cramped, horrific conditions to work on brutal plantations in the Americas, and essentially became property to their masters. For 300 years, this practice continued in the British Empire
Because this is
until it was
an
fully
horrific
abolished
thing.
in 1833.
Picture.
This period also saw a wave of plantations in Ireland, where Irish lands were confiscated and given to English and Scottish settlers.
Oh,
Tensions
no,
would
know
rise
that.
between Charles I and Parliament. Following disagreements, conflicts between royal and parliamentary authority within England led to the English Civil War. The country became divided between parliamentarians, known as the Roundheads, and royalists, known as the Cavaliers. Under Oliver Cromwell and the New Model Army, the parliamentarians defeated Charles and executed him for treason. Cromwell became Lord Protector and
Must have been so nice. I'm just executing all my enemies.
dissolved the monarchy, but shortly after his death it was restored under Charles II. Charles II married Catherine of Braganza, and when she arrived from Portugal she introduced the greatest beverage of all time. Tea.
Oh,
Tea had
okay.
been used by China for centuries, but its arrival in the 17th century captured the interest
That seems late. Like, for someone whose whole identity is drinking tea, I think like starting in the 1600s, I would have thought it started earlier than
of the
that.
English aristocracy, and soon captivated every other Englishman. In 1685, a Catholic James II became king in a largely Protestant nation.
Yeah.
James'
Isn't that, can you do that? Can a Catholic be like king of England? Did not know that.
daughter Mary and her Dutch husband William were both Protestant, and many nobles unhappy with the Catholic king invited William to become king. William
Invited.
found considerable support when he invaded, and he was soon crowned King William III in what became known as the Glorious Revolution. Although William's supporters dominated the government, there remained a significant following for James II in the Scottish Highlands. Clan MacDonald of Glencoe was one such group who had not been prompt in pledging allegiance to the new
Oh, of
monarch.
course, yeah.
For this reason alone, 38 members of the clan were murdered in what became known as the Massacre of Glencoe. After Scotland's failed colonial endeavours in Nova Scotia and Panama, and an economic crisis in the 1690s, there was a union between England and Scotland, forming the United Kingdom of Great Britain. The House of Stuart had ruled Britain for just over a century, but ended with the death of Queen Anne. Sophia of Hanover was the granddaughter of James I, and her son George became king. Great Britain soon found itself drawn into several European wars, most notable being the War of the Spanish Succession and the 7 Years' War. Victories in these wars resulted in territory for the Empire, particularly in North America, although it resulted in considerable debt. In order to make up for this debt, King
Yeah, one thing about wars, they're gonna be expensive.
George III ordered heavy taxes be placed on the 13 colonies. This, among other reasons, culminated into the American War of Independence, and with financial help from France and Spain, the Americans were victorious. The East India Company, which was
this was a very thing, like how is it, like the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Founded by Elizabeth I, had grown rapidly, and even operated its own military and controlled a sizable amount of territory. The company had set up fortified warehouses where they traded with many India rulers, acquiring important luxuries like textiles and spices. One of the most important cities of all was Bengal, as it had a large taxable population. The governor of Bengal, Robert Clive, ordered that the population grow opium to export to China, instead of growing food, as it proved to be a great source of income.
Oh my god, like this little caricature, it's like, oh my god.
However, when a famine struck, it resulted in the deaths of millions of people.
Oh my god,
Meanwhile,
how awful.
Captain James Cook arrived at New Zealand and the southeast coast of Australia, although he wasn't the first to discover the area because of past Portuguese and Dutch explorers. However, unlike the Dutch and Portuguese, Britain claimed it as their new penal colony, known as New South Wales, with the first convicts arriving in 1778. A new threat.
I think it's crazy that you just send the convicts in order to like populate a territory. Like, shouldn't you just send probably the best people? I don't know, that seems weird to me.
Had emerged from France, French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon had come to dominate most of Europe, but Britain's advantage was that she was an island, and the Royal Navy had become a major force at sea. Invasion of Britain was near impossible, and in a series of coalitions Napoleon was defeated. By the end of the Napoleonic Wars, Britain was growing rapidly into a superpower based on their supremacy of naval engineering.
It's crazy that it took them, like, I would have thought they were superpowers since like way earlier than this.
Furthermore, in Ireland the Great Famine struck. A disease killing potato plants. Ireland, which had merged with Britain, relied heavily on this crop for food, but the British government forced Ireland to export what little food they had to other areas.
Yeah, awful.
Without any aid or food, Ireland's population plummeted by half due to starvation and emigration to countries like the United States. Things weren't looking so great in India either, as India was rebelling against company rule. The East India Company had employed many Indian soldiers known as sepoys, who were under the command of British soldiers. These sepoys grew increasingly unhappy, and a revolt soon occurred, yet it quickly failed due to a lack of unity between Indians. After the rebellion, the British government took direct control, with Queen Victoria being declared Empress of India. During the 19th century, the world was forever changed by the Industrial Revolution. Society was transformed by technological advances and increasing mechanisation, and would launch Britain to global dominance. Some of the greatest innovations and inventions were the sewing machine, the fire extinguisher, steam-powered engines and turbines, the electric
The fire extinguisher, that's weird, but yeah, fires were a huge problem back in those days.
motor and photography. The telegraph was also a major invention, as a message could now be sent from Britain to India in a matter of hours. The establishment of railways and trains also transformed transport forever. Instead of travelling days by horse and carriage, it now only took a matter of hours by train.
I think this is really like where the modern period starts. Crazy to say about something with carriages, but I think this is like modern history kind of starts.
Engineering and communication advances not only united the empire, they triggered a manufacturing boom like no other.
Yeah.
People flocked from rural areas to city centres for jobs.
And that's still the case to this day. That's why I think like it's sort of like the modern sort of like life view, it's based on this.
Productivity reached an all-time high, but the consequences of mass migration resulted in extremely cramped and polluted cities.
Exactly.
However, with these problems that were generated, it resulted in an improved sewage system. Newcastle focused on shipbuilding, Manchester the cotton industry, Liverpool became a major trading centre, Middlesbrough fixated itself on iron and steel works. The presence of iron ore, limestone and large coal deposits in the West Midlands and South East Wales prompted the establishment of ironworks, and Scotland boomed in the linen industry.
Yeah, they were rich.
The Victorian era also saw a major change in society, as families from the poorest backgrounds gained access to education, although it was much stricter than today's standards. The 1860s also saw the rise of the greatest food combination ever, fish and chips.
Oh.
Towards the end of the 19th century,
Also, continue for a dish that's their national traditional dish. Seems quite modern to me.
European powers came together at the Berlin Conference to divide Africa between them. A group in South Africa known as the Boers, who were originally Dutch settlers, proved
that's not
difficult
good
for the British. The Boers lived in two nations, the Free Orange State and the Republic of Transvaal, and both resisted British rule using guerrilla warfare. To counter this, the British placed many women and children in their tens of thousands into concentration camps, where many died from starvation and disease. Britain became a major player in the First World War, and many men proudly volunteered to serve and protect their country. The Great War, as it was called, saw the use of new technology.
Yeah, of course they weren't calling it the First World War back in those days. That would have been weird. They thought it was the war to end all wars.
Such as dreadnoughts, warplanes, artillery, machine guns, grenades, chemical weapons, bolt-action rifles,
oh my God,
and the first use of the tank.
Many
faced horrific conditions in the trenches and witnessed gruesome battles. Millions died and many returned home shell-shocked by what they had seen.
Yeah, well, war is awful, just however you look at it. And of course, if you introduce like a modern sort of like equipment and artillery, like it only gets worse from there.
The empire reached its territorial height in 1921 after gaining territory from Germany and the crumbling Ottoman Empire.
Wow.
The empire now ruled over 400 million people and controlled 1/4 of the world's landmass. But the reality was, Britain could no longer afford to build bases or ships.
And you can't control, that's like way too many people. You can't control all those territories that are like so far apart as well.
To defend its empire as it had before 1914. Ireland finally managed to break away from British rule and formed the Irish Free State, and shortly after became a republic. The Second World War was more brutal and horrific than the First. Most of Europe had fallen under German occupation, and under Prime Minister Winston Churchill, Britain stood strong during the Battle of Britain and the Blitz. Britain were extremely successful at intercepting and decoding enemy communications, with the likes of Alan Turing, who cracked the German Enigma code. The war ended with an Allied victory, but many nations within the empire felt a desire for independence, and it was clear the empire was about to break. India was one such nation who were ready to declare their independence. Mohandas Gandhi.
It's crazy, but it's like, yeah, all empires fall one way or another, like, they crumble.
He practiced a non-violent approach, and this proved successful, as shortly after India gained independence. The Commonwealth of Nations.
But I think it was because it wasn't feasible for them to actually maintain this, and it was because it was too expensive as well. That's what, it makes like a good, sort of like a combination of factors that made it so.
It was formed to improve relations and economic ties with former colonies. This still remains today, with 53 members united by language, history, culture, and shared values of democracy. The British Empire officially ended with Hong Kong, Britain's last colony, being handed over to China in 1997. The Empire committed many atrocities on many different people, imposing their culture and civilization while often wiping out native ones.
Yeah, it's
On
bad.
the other hand, this brought about globalization and the uniting of the modern world. And without such innovations and industrialization, the world might have been a very different place.
Yes, that's
The
correct.
United Kingdom suffered a small economic recession in 2008, but has since recovered. It is a multicultural society, with each region retaining a presence of its history and culture. If you ever visit, look out for the Welsh cake, the haggis, the whiskey, the Chelsea bun, the parmo, the Cumberland sausage, the Yorkshire pudding, or the Cornish pasty.
I'm so curious about a lot
The
of
UK
them.
remains a member of NATO, United Nations and the World Trade Organization, and uses the pound currency. In 2016, a referendum resulted in 51.9% of voters in favour to leave the European Union.
That's crazy, it's been so
Although
long.
the countries within the United Kingdom became divided on the matter, leading to the many questions of its future unity. Thank you for watching. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, like, subscribe, follow us on Twitter, support us on Patreon. Have a good one.
Okay, I think like this is an incredible video. Like the amount of research that went into this, like hats off to them, seriously. I think but it was good because it's very well thought and researched, but it's very interesting at the same time as for like all the animations and stuff. That the actual amount of like the information and the research, like it was delivered like very, I know, like in a very interesting way. But again, the amount of research is like this was a lot. I really do like it because it's like, you get to see like how. Because in this day and age, you think of like, oh, Great Britain, the United Kingdom. Like, you think, oh, it's a huge country. Well, not a huge country as in like big, but big as in like the amount and the space that it occupies in like both economy and political and influence. Not not big in territory. But you kind of get to see like, look at them how it started. Like, it started as being like, again, it was just like the Neolithic, like, people were there in this territory and they did this, and it was a bunch of people from different groups that weren't united, and they were constantly like fighting each other. Well, that's constant throughout history, but it's kind of crazy. They were like, oh, the influence I think still is being seen to this day, and I think this is kind of like super crazy to me. Because you always about the Celts, and about the Saxons, and about there's like a bunch of other groups of people, and it's like, yeah, of course I know them because I know that they were like, oh, they were like an ancient group of people, but it's like they're very old. It was like year 2000, yeah, year 1000. It was like, oh my god, it was literally like 1,000 years ago. It's kind of crazy that the influence, like even if it's just in the name, it's still like you still feel it to this day. And the actual sort of like the Wales was still, and to that in that time period, it was still a territory that still exists to this day. Like, it is insane. And even Brittany, although I know that Brittany is technically it's France, but still, like, it's kind of, Brittany is France, but Brittany also comes from like Great, it's the same name as in like Great Britain. Like, all the influence of so many things, like, you can trace back to this, and it's kind of crazy that I don't really think that you think about this a lot. I don't know, it's like the Britons and the Wessex, and I don't know, it's like there's so many things that you don't really think, because they're like a given, but it's like, no, they were like, again, it happened like so many years ago, and again, their influence is still felt, and apparently that's how the actual, like, the English language, like, was created. A lot of like Scandinavian influences, like, this is like, wow, again, you can see how actually, like, how Scottish people were not created, but technically yes, how they were created, how Scottish culture developed. That's something distinct and different from the other rest of like the United Kingdom and the part of Britain. And also the same thing with Ireland. It's like, yeah, you can see them how they sort of like started, and of course they had like a lot of similarities, but at the same time you can really do see like how they sort of like diverged. I think at some point, because I think like what most people would know about like Great Britain, like history of Great Britain, I know at least that I did. Of course, like the whole like the like George I and the Tudors and the War of the Roses and all of that, but I really do think like it's crazy, like the whole, and again, this is like a very summarized version. It's like they had like so many wars. It's like, yeah, you had like the 100-year War, the 70-year War. There's like so many wars, and they're obviously all constantly conquering each other. They had like so many kings, so many queens, especially like kings. They were constantly fighting each other. They were constantly invading, killing them. It's like, oh my god, it's crazy. And then came the Romans, which I think is like, again, crazy to think of like how the Romans actually. Again, the influence is still being felt. Like, again, modern society would not be the same without the Romans, and it's crazy if you really do think about it. It's like, I don't know, like, Romans started, like, they were like, they had to walk a huge, like, there was a really great distance to the point, again, the Roman Empire, into that they actually managed to get, like, up to the United Kingdom, like, and to Great Britain in general. Like, that's such a huge feat that I don't know, like, do we get like enough sort of like, hats off to the Romans, which again, was it all good? No, but I don't think life would be the same without them. So it's kind of like, again, their influence has been and still being felt in this day and age. The whole, like, obviously the whole, and when the America was not discovered, but, well, yes, when they started conquering and sort of like developing new territories, I didn't know it was like I thought it was just because obviously everyone wants more money, and more money like actually translates to actually I want more territory, because I probably want to grow crops and I want to sell them, and and I want to sell them to other nations, and that's how I earn my money. But I didn't know it was motivated initially by a religious thing. Just as I didn't know that at some point the Great Britain had a Catholic king. To me, like, that's crazy, because obviously after all the reforms and stuff, it's like, wait, they didn't, like, they had a Catholic king? That seems so I don't know, like that seems unnatural to me. That seems crazy because of the whole thing. I know how much of a problem it was. Like, yes, between the Catholics, they didn't like them. So, and it was a whole thing with Scotland. So it is like, wait, and you're telling me that they sort of like elected a Catholic king at some point? Again, insane. And obviously, again, the territories, I don't even, like, the whole thing about Africa, like, obviously it was an awful thing. And of course, in India as well. I think, especially I think the one in Africa, I think that gets I don't know if it gets overlooked. I think maybe it's bad for me to say of like it gets overlooked, but like, because obviously everyone knows, of course, and not just the actual, like the transatlantic Slavic sort of like trade. It wasn't just that. I think it was the whole thing about them, a bunch of nations, the Dutch and the British and the Portuguese, just sort of like dividing territory that didn't belong to them and saying like, yeah, sure, you'll take this part and I'll take this part. Like, it's just obviously an awful thing. I mean, you can't really deny the influence and obviously the history. Like, it's something that happened. Was it all good? No, of course, but I think you shouldn't like shy away from the negative parts as well, and it needs to be acknowledged. Like, of course, you're not blaming anyone because like, these people, they're not alive. Like, they're not alive. They've been canceled. Of course, like no one, you can't put the blame on actual people because they've been long dead and gone. But as a nation, of course, like it's kind of like it's a shameful past, right? It's sort of like it's shameful. I think you should definitely acknowledge it because, again, and I like that the video actually recognized, yes, they did a lot of like bad things as well. Like the British Empire did a lot of great things, and modern life would not be the same without them. Especially again after the Industrial Revolution, like how the world actually changed, and that's sort of like the basis for how modern life works, and how the economy works, and how a lot of like, again, how modern society sort of like a little based on this. Obviously a lot of things have changed, but the whole like basis of this all of how modern life works, like it comes from this. And of course, like the British influence, like, yes, it was good on one hand. They created like so many things that we still, again, we use to this day. And the influence of like the British influence has been felt in so many other countries and all over the world. And we have a lot to thank to them. But yes, of course, we actually have to acknowledge, like, they also, like, again, as a British Empire, they also did a lot of like bad things in India and in Africa, and even, of course, even in the American like territory, in the American colonies. So, it's one thing of like not it doesn't make them like less or bad, or just as, again, you have to like acknowledge both parts as just being something that happened. Because it is history. Like, you can't change it, you can't do anything about this, and people are not going to atone for this. It's like, again, because the guilty parties have been long dead and gone, so it's like, what do you want me to do about this? No, it's just a thing about acknowledging, like, yeah, obviously there were some incredible, like, awful things being committed in a lot of places in the world. That doesn't negate like how good of an influence like some of the other things have been, but of course, like, there were also some bad things, and I think it's one of those things that's like, when you take the good things, you also have to take in the bad things as well, and because everything comes in a balance. So it is the thing about, you really do have to acknowledge both things, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like in a bad or in a good connotation. It just is, and that's it, which I'm glad to see like the video touched on this, because it's sort of like, again, it was something that happened, and yes, we have to acknowledge that it was bad. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're gonna like rake them over the coals for this, but it's just like, wow, it's bad. I really think like it's crazy to think, obviously, because you have the Commonwealth, which is like a huge thing even to this day, and obviously you really get to see like it's been a thing for like 300, 400 years. Is still the Commonwealth still exists. A lot of these countries are still part of the Commonwealth, like even though they gained their independence, they're still, again, they're part of the Commonwealth, which I like. It's a really, well, I like the idea of like this organization that actually groups a whole people together. I think they're happy with it. I would guess the other territories are happy with it. We're gaining independence, but also, again, we're part of the Commonwealth, and I think it has a lot of benefits for them. So, it's good apparently, because if they have remained so long in that, it's good. But I really do think it's kind of crazy to think of like, yes, eventually like they got rid of like the empires have, again, they fell, because like I mentioned, all empires, as great as they were, like again, the Romans, the British Empire, they eventually all empires fall. Sometimes it takes them like hundreds of years, sometimes it takes them hundreds of years, but at some point they are going to fall, because it's unmanageable. Like, you just can't have that much territory and that amount of people, and you can't really handle, like, I think just it's just you can't, like, as people, again, whether that is a king, like a prime minister, or someone in charge, or even just a board, they have to fall at some point, just because, again, it's hard to actually manage like so many different types, like juggling so many things. And of course, not to get into the whole like where we actually are invading territories, like that's a whole other thing, and people native to those territories are gonna have it at some point, of course. But I think it makes it, you know, as long as you like have a lot of money and you're sort of like have a lot of power, you can sort of like maintain that, and you can sort of like control those people. And of course, they mentioned Ghazni and all of that. Of course, like, great guy. Yes, he managed to like to break them out of this. But I think it also, like, if that had happened, if he had lived, I don't know, 100 years probably earlier, I don't think they would have gained their independence. And this is ultimately what I'm going with this, is because, again, it's a combination of factors that made it so that when he came into the picture, like, even them, they were sort of like being weakened because it was unmanageable, it was expensive, and they were like, yeah, fine, I'll just like, I'll take them. It's like, again, it's the same thing as probably like independence, how independence works. Like, yes, of course, there's a spirit of the ones that have to like, they want to gain their independence, and of course they have like their spirit and probably and the support and all of that, but that's really not enough. Like, the empire that they're trying to gain their independence from also has to be sort of like willing to either like cut their losses, or be like, it's kind of like manageable for us to actually like keep going at it, so it's fine, you guys take it. So it is a thing about playing the long game as well, of like, we're slowly like gaining ground. It doesn't happen overnight, as we saw. But having said that, I think it's crazy that the last sort of like the British Empire, like the last sort of like territory was Hong Kong, which I know, yes, the whole thing about Hong Kong, I know it's a whole political thing, but it was in, I think it was 1990s, like it was 1990s or 1980s, which seems like, wow, it lasted a really long time, and that was apparently the last territory that sort of they sort of like gave away, which, again, crazy, like it lasts such a huge amount of time, which is like crazy. But yes, a lot to think about it. I love this video, very informative in a way that's also it was quite interesting and animated and fun as well. So yes, I loved it. But that was it for today, and we'll see you next time. Bye.